I still can't sleep without thinking about it. The sound of footsteps pacing outside my bedroom door, the feeling of being watched, and that godforsaken portrait. Even now, months later, I catch myself glancing over my shoulder whenever I'm alone in a quiet room. It's like some part of me is waiting for her to show up again. Let me start from the beginning. My name is Claire, and last year, I moved to Merida with 3 other expats. We were all trying to escape something: bad jobs, bad relationships, bad lives, and Merida seemed like the perfect place to reinvent ourselves. The city was vibrant, affordable, and full of history. So when Emma suggested we rent a hacienda for a weekend getaway, none of us hesitated. We found this beautiful old estate online, a sprawling property surrounded by lush gardens and towering palm trees. It looked straight out of a postcard, complete with arched doorways, colourful tiles, and a courtyard fountain. When we arrived, the owner greeted us warmly, her wrinkled face breaking into a wide smile as she handed over the keys. She spoke broken English, but made one thing crystal clear. Every night before bed, we had to leave a plate of food on the dining table for the forgotten guest. At first, we laughed it off. Superstition, Ryan said, rolling his eyes, probably just trying to scare us. But Emma, ever the peacemaker, insisted we play along. What's the harm? She reasoned. And honestly, it felt kind of charming, like we were participating in some local tradition. That first night, we set out leftovers from dinner and joked about who might eat them. No one touched the plate, though, or so we thought. The next morning, I woke up early to make coffee and noticed the plate was empty. Weird, I thought, because none of us admitted to eating anything. Still, I didn't think much of it. We spent the day exploring the grounds, lounging by the pool, and taking photos for Instagram. Everything seemed normal, until that evening. After dinner, we repeated the ritual, leaving another plate of food on the table. This time, I couldn't shake the feeling that someone or something was watching us. As we cleaned up, I kept glancing toward the doorway, half expecting to see someone standing there, but no one appeared, and eventually we went to bed. That's when it started. Around midnight, I heard faint footsteps coming from the hallway. At first, I assumed it was one of my friends getting water or using the bathroom, but then the footsteps stopped right outside my door. I froze, listening intently. Nothing, just silence. Then they started again, slower this time, almost hesitant. Finally, I worked up the nerve to open the door. The hallway was empty. But here's the thing, it didn't feel empty, it felt occupied, like there was someone, or something, just beyond what I could see. Shaking it off, I told myself I was imagining things and crawled back into bed. The footsteps returned a few minutes later, louder now, more deliberate. They echoed down the hall and stopped at the top of the staircase. I pulled the covers over my head and tried not to cry. The next morning, I told the others what happened. To my surprise, they'd heard the same thing. Jake swore he saw a shadowy figure moving past his window late at night, while Emma claimed she felt someone brushing against her arm in the dark. None of us wanted to admit it, but we were scared. Later that afternoon, curiosity got the better of me. While everyone else napped, I decided to explore the house. Most of the rooms were locked, but I managed to find an unlocked door leading to an abandoned wing of the hacienda. Dust covered every surface, and the air smelled stale, like it hadn't been disturbed in decades. Faded portraits lined the walls, their subjects staring blankly ahead. One painting caught my eye, a woman dressed in Victorian-era clothing, her expression somber yet eerily familiar. Something about her face sent chills down my spine. I leaned closer, squinting at the details, and realized with growing dread that she looked like me. That night, the footsteps came earlier, louder, closer. I could hear them pacing outside my door, pausing occasionally as if deciding whether to come in. Then, suddenly, they stopped altogether. For a moment, everything was silent, too silent. And then I heard it, a soft sobbing sound coming from the direction of the dining room. My heart pounding, I grabbed the flashlight from my bag and crept downstairs. The sobbing grew louder as I approached the table, where the plate of food sat untouched. I swung the beam of light around the room, expecting to see someone hiding in the shadows. Instead, I saw her, the woman from the portrait. She stood in the corner, translucent and shimmering, her hollow eyes fixed on mine. "Why did you forget me?" she whispered, her voice barely audible over the sound of her tears. "Why did you leave me behind?" I stumbled backward, dropping the flashlight. By the time I scrambled to pick it up, she was gone. Terrified, I woke the others and demanded we leave immediately. We packed our bags in record time, stuffing clothes haphazardly into suitcases. As we drove away, I glanced back at the hacienda one last time. Standing in the doorway was the ghostly figure of the woman, her hand raised in a silent farewell. We never spoke about what happened that weekend, not really. But weeks later, I learned the truth from a local historian. Decades ago, a traveler had sought refuge at the hacienda during a storm. The owners refused to let her in, and she died of exposure shortly after. Her spirit supposedly lingered, haunting anyone who stayed there unless they honored her memory by leaving offerings of food. I don't know if that's true or not. All I know is that I'll never set foot in that house again. Whatever she wanted, whatever she needed, I hope she found peace, because I sure as hell haven't.
Let me start by saying this. I've never been one for big parties. Crowds make me anxious. Loud music gives me headaches, and the idea of dressing up just to sweat in someone else's house has always felt exhausting. But when my coworker Sofia invited me to her cousin's quinceañera in Puebla, I couldn't say no. She'd been nothing but kind to me since I moved to Mexico City 6 months ago, helping me navigate everything from public transportation to grocery shopping. Besides, she promised it would be fun, a chance to experience real Mexican culture. So, against my better judgment, I said yes. The party was held at a sprawling family estate on the outskirts of Puebla. From the moment we arrived, it was clear this wasn't just some casual gathering, it was an event. Strings of papel picado fluttered in the breeze, colorful lights illuminated the courtyard, and a live band played upbeat rancheras that made even the grumpiest-looking uncles tap their feet. The birthday girl, dressed in a poofy pink gown, sat regally at the head of a long table, smiling politely as relatives fawned over her. It all seemed so picturesque, like something out of a movie. At first, everything went smoothly. I mingled awkwardly with Sofia's family, sipping horchata and nibbling on tamales while pretending to understand rapid-fire Spanish conversations. People were friendly enough, though I couldn't shake the feeling that they were sizing me up, not maliciously but curiously, like I was some exotic animal at the zoo. Still, I told myself to relax. This was supposed to be fun, right? But then things started to feel off. It began subtly. Around midnight, I noticed that no one was leaving. Guests who had looked tired hours earlier were still dancing, laughing, and drinking as if the night had only just begun. Servers circulated endlessly, refilling glasses and replacing empty trays of food with fresh ones. Even the birthday girl hadn't budged from her seat. She just sat there, staring blankly ahead, her smile frozen in place. When I asked Sofia about it, she shrugged and said, "Mexicans know how to party." By 2 a.m., I was ready to call it a night. My feet hurt, my head throbbed, and I could barely keep my eyes open. But when I tried to leave, a cheerful aunt stopped me at the door. "Where are you going?" she asked, her tone light but firm. "The party's not over yet." Before I could respond, she ushered me back inside, pressing a glass of tequila into my hand. I should have left anyway. I should have insisted, pushed past her, done something. But instead, I stayed, and that's when things took a turn. Around 3 a.m., the energy shifted. The music grew louder, almost deafening. drowning out conversation entirely. Laughter turned manic, bordering on hysterical. People danced wildly, their movements jerky and unnatural, like marionettes controlled by an invisible puppeteer. A group of teenagers huddled near the fountain, giggling uncontrollably, their faces flushed and glassy-eyed. One man grabbed my arm and spun me onto the dance floor, his grip surprisingly strong. When I pulled away, he grinned, but his teeth were too sharp, too white, too wrong. Desperate for an escape, I slipped into the kitchen, hoping to find a quiet corner to collect my thoughts. Instead, I found chaos. Dishes clattered loudly as servers rushed back and forth, their movements frantic and mechanical. One woman dropped a tray of glasses, shattering them across the floor, but didn't stop to clean it up. Her face was pale, her expression vacant, as if she were sleepwalking. Another server caught my eye and beckoned me closer. "You shouldn't be here," he whispered urgently, his voice barely audible over the din. "They'll notice." "Who will notice?" I demanded, but he shook his head and disappeared into the crowd before answering. Panic set in. I knew I had to get out. Now. But every exit I tried led me deeper into the labyrinthine estate. Doors opened into unfamiliar rooms filled with more guests, all eerily cheerful despite the late hour. Finally, I stumbled into the gardens, where the air was cooler and quieter. Hiding behind a cluster of bushes, I waited until the commotion died down, or at least until I thought it was safe to move again. When dawn broke, I crept back toward the main house. To my relief, most of the guests were gone, though a few stragglers lingered, slumped in chairs or sprawled on the ground. The birthday girl still sat at the head table, her head bowed as if asleep. As I passed her, I swore I heard her whisper, "Thank you for staying." I didn't look back. Later that day, Sophia called to check on me. She sounded apologetic but distant, like she already regretted inviting me. "Are you okay?" she asked hesitantly. "Did anything weird happen?" Weird didn't begin to cover it, but rather than explain, I simply said, "Yeah, I'm fine, just tired." She sighed, then added cryptically, "Some families, they hold on to traditions longer than others. Sometimes those traditions take on a life of their own." She refused to elaborate further, no matter how much I pressed her. To this day, I don't know exactly what happened that night. Was it a curse? A hallucination brought on by exhaustion and too many drinks? Or was it something darker, something older, some ancient force binding everyone to that endless celebration? All I know is that I survived, and I'll never attend another party like it again.
I still can't drive at night without thinking about her, the woman in the embroidered dress. Even now, months later, I catch myself glancing at the passenger seat whenever I'm alone on the road, convinced she'll be there again. It's irrational, I know, but some fears don't listen to logic. I'd just spent the weekend visiting friends in Guadalajara. The trip had been fun, good food, great company, but by Sunday evening, all I wanted was to get back home to Puerto Vallarta. The thought of spending another hour cooped up in their tiny apartment made my skin crawl. So, around 10 p.m., I said my goodbyes, loaded up my car, and hit the highway. The drive was uneventful at first, just me, the hum of the engine, and miles of open road flanked by endless fields of agave plants swaying gently in the breeze. The sky was pitch black, no moon or stars visible, and the only light came from my headlights cutting through the darkness. I wasn't tired, not yet anyway, but the monotony of the drive started to wear on me. That's when I saw her. At first, I thought it was a trick of the light, a misplaced shadow. But as I got closer, I realized it was a person. A young woman, standing perfectly still in the middle of the highway. She wore traditional Mexican clothing, a long skirt embroidered with intricate patterns and a blouse that shimmered faintly under my headlights. Her hair hung loose around her shoulders, framing a face partially obscured by the glare. My instincts screamed at me to keep driving, to assume she'd move out of the way, but something stopped me. Maybe it was guilt, or maybe it was curiosity. Whatever it was, I slowed down and pulled over a few feet ahead of her. Rolling down the window, I called out, "Are you okay? Do you need help?" She didn't answer right away. Instead, she tilted her head slightly, studying me as if deciding whether I was trustworthy. Then, in a voice so soft it barely carried over the sound of the engine, she said, "Yes, can you take me to the next town?" Her tone was calm, almost detached, like she was asking for directions rather than a ride. Part of me wanted to say no, to tell her to flag someone else down, but looking at her, I couldn't bring myself to do it. She looked lost, vulnerable, like she didn't belong out here in the middle of nowhere. "Sure," I said finally, gesturing toward the passenger seat. "Hop in." She hesitated for a moment before walking around to the other side of the car. As she climbed in, I noticed two things. First, her clothes smelled faintly of earth and dampness, like they'd been buried somewhere. Second, her reflection in the rearview mirror didn't match her movements. When she settled into the seat, her reflection remained standing outside the car for a split second before vanishing entirely. I shook it off, telling myself it was just fatigue playing tricks on me. Starting the engine again, I asked, "Where exactly are we headed?" "The next town," she replied vaguely. "You'll know it when you see it." That should have been my first warning sign, but instead of pressing her for details, I focused on the road ahead, trying to ignore the growing sense of unease creeping into the car. The GPS displayed familiar routes at first, but after a while, it began glitching. Static crackled over the radio, interrupting songs midway and replacing them with faint whispers in Spanish. I turned it off quickly, pretending it didn't bother me. "So," I said, attempting small talk, "what were you doing out there? Pretty dangerous place to be stranded." She didn't respond immediately. When she did, her voice carried an odd cadence, as though she were reciting memorized lines. "I was waiting," she said simply, "for someone like you." "For someone like me?" I echoed, forcing a laugh. "What does that mean?" "You'll understand soon enough," she murmured, turning her head to look out the window. Her profile was serene, almost statuesque, but there was something wrong with her eyes. They reflected none of the passing lights, remaining dark and hollow. By this point, I was regretting my decision to pick her up. Every instinct told me to pull over and let her out, but I couldn't bring myself to do it. Something about her presence felt inescapable, like she'd already claimed a piece of me. After what felt like hours, we reached what appeared to be a small village. Adobe houses lined the dirt streets, their windows glowing faintly with warm, flickering light. Figures stood motionless in doorways, watching silently as we drove past. Their faces were indistinct, blurred by distance or shadow, but I could feel their gaze burning into me. "Stop here," the woman instructed suddenly, pointing to the center of the square. Obediently, I pulled over and put the car in park. Before I could ask anything else, she opened the door and stepped out, turning back briefly to say, "Thank you, you've done well." And then she was gone, disappearing into the darkness between the buildings. Relieved to be rid of her, I exhaled deeply and shifted the car into reverse, ready to leave this eerie place behind. But as I glanced in the rearview mirror, my blood ran cold. The figures who had been standing in the doorways were now moving, walking unnaturally fast, their forms synchronized like puppets controlled by the same strings. They spread across the horizon, closing in on the car despite the distance. Worse still, their faces were blank, and their bodies seemed to glow faintly, casting an unnatural light over the landscape. Heart pounding, I slammed my foot on the accelerator, tearing down the dirt road as fast as the car would go. The figures kept pace effortlessly, spreading wider and wider until they formed a wall of glowing silhouettes blocking my path. Just as panic threatened to overwhelm me, I heard a soft chuckle beside me. I whipped my head to the passenger seat, and there she was, sitting calmly as if she'd never left. "You shouldn't have come here," she whispered. I screamed and swerved violently, avoiding a collision with a tree. By the time I regained control of the car, the figures were gone. Somehow I was back on the main highway, miles away from the village. When I finally made it home, I avoided talking about what happened. Who would believe me anyway? But days later, while refueling at a gas station, I struck up a conversation with a local man who mentioned a cursed village in Jalisco. According to legend, its inhabitants wandered endlessly, seeking drivers foolish enough to bring them closer to the living world. Now, every time I drive at night, I hear faint footsteps echoing outside my car.